All right, guys, thanks for joining. We'll kick off the conversation. So thanks for joining, everyone. This is our session 2 of our 4-part series dedicated to sourcing and material innovation in fashion in celebration of the launch of the CFDA.com Materials Hub, created in partnership with UGG. So my name is McNeil, and I'm the Associate Director of Program Strategies at the CFDA. In my role, I lead the supply chain team and all related programming for the organization, including the Materials Hub that we will be going over today. So today I'll be doing a site walkthrough of the Materials Hub on CFDA.com, which we have soft launched today, which is super exciting. Following the site walkthrough, we will have a moderated discussion with our great panelists, all of who you see here, and all of whom are working at brands that are currently navigating innovation across sourcing and materials. So as a reminder, our chat is being recorded and will be uploaded on CFDA.com and our YouTube channel over the next 24 hours or so. Please note that we will have time at the end to answer questions you may have on the topics discussed, and you can submit them via the question section of this Zoom webinar platform. So to kick off, I'm here to give a brief overview of the CFDA's latest open access resource, the Materials Hub. And so the Materials Hub is a natural extension to the work that my colleagues, including Sarah Kozlowski and her team, completed back in 2019 to help designers access more information and innovation around sustainability to assist designers in integrating more responsible processes and products into their supply chain. This was done mostly through the CFDA's Sustainability Resource Hub, which you can find on CFDA.com as well, under the Resources and Tools tab of the website. So for the Materials Hub, we chose to focus on sourcing and materials specifically for 2 reasons. The first one is there is an increasingly high level of investment into material innovation and fashion, leading to a very large number of resources available to you as designers to access and integrate into your supply chains. And then secondly, and really most importantly, based on the work that we do at CFDA, is that innovation and sustainability has become an area of support that designers are asking for more and more these days. And so we really want to find ways and find resources and programs and initiatives that speak to ways that we can support our designers and the different areas that they're interested in. And so with these 2 aspects in mind, we spent the last few months developing the various components that make up the Materials Hub, and I'm excited to walk you through the site today. Once again, if you have any questions as they go through this, please submit them via the question feature, and we'll get to them at the end of the panel discussion around the last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All right. And panelists, if you don't mind, just give me a nod if you see the site. All right, perfect. All right, so on CFDA.com, to access the Materials Hub, you actually go to the Resources and Tools section on the site. And so that's right up at the top of the navigation. It includes a ton of really incredible resources outside of the Materials Hub, including all of our sustainability work, supply chain and manufacturing, including our production directory, and lots of other great resources. So you'll see here right at the top, we have the Materials Hub a page that we'll go to. And so if you just click here, View Materials Hub, you actually move into the page. And so you'll get this really great landing that is hosted again by the CFDA and in partnership with UGG. And so at the beginning of the page, you actually see this really great navigation piece here at the top where you can go to each of the components you're looking for. So the first is the introduction that talks about a lot of the things that I just mentioned to you around the background for why we did this, why we're working with UGG on this, and different areas of focus for this resource. And the first component that you'll get to as well within the Materials Hub is the Innovation Index. And so this is featuring top-tier technologies in fiber and fabric, and it provides top-line information on leaders in this space in a really easily digestible and searchable format, similar to other A to Z directories and different resources we have on CFDA.com. And so if you click on the view the full innovation index, you actually get to this page. And so this will be the landing page for the innovation index. And you can actually, as an innovator who's doing something interesting within fiber materials, you can actually register to be included on the innovation index, but you actually don't need to register to actually view the resource. All you have to do is log down. So if you go down to the page after this, you'll get an introduction that just speaks a lot more around the the resource and why we built it this way, and a few different notes included. And then the actual resources down here at the bottom, where you'll be able to go through and discover and connect with these different innovations across mostly fiber. And so the different filters you can actually go through and narrow your search down is sustainability considerations. So you think about, the different areas of focus that are really important to you around, is this a certified material? Is it, the land or biodiversity conservation or regenerative piece to it? Is it transparent or traceable? There's lots of really great pieces within the sustainability considerations. And so as you click these, things will begin to close down within some of the different options that you can pick based on the filter that you used. Outside of sustainability considerations, you can see market availability. This is super important to us to have it really front and center around, is this actual innovation accessible to you as a designer? And so you have either available or not available for that option. And again, you'll see different things that will be grayed out. And so you'll see all these are available that you can still click on. And then also we had the main material classification. So these are different pieces within that classification around the different core classifications of the material within this list of different options. And so there's, food and natural waste, natural fibers, different recycled pieces, vegan, biodegradable, lots of really great options there. And then the last piece is supporting emerging designers. I wouldn't get too caught up on this if you don't see that they don't have this listed, but it does give you a really good idea of kind of businesses that are catering especially to the emerging designers. And so you'll see that a lot of these, are still selected within that. But again, I would still reach out even if that's not selected within the listing. And so just a few examples I wanted to go through within this. The first one being bacteria nanocellulose leather. So this is something that is really interesting and actually is based out of Chicago by Speculative Surfaces by Madison Berger, her name is. And so she's building out a really interesting leather alternative to that. And so you can see within this page that there's lots of great overview information that she's provided. You can go directly to her website. You can understand, what the parent company is around this section around Speculative Surfaces LLC. You have her direct contact information that you can reach out to her. And then you go into all the different areas that she selected around the sustainability considerations, the material classification, and then these pieces at the bottom, which is market availability. So this one, for example, is not available until next spring. The material origin, so she's doing it in North America, and then the material category, which is just one answer that they give that really aims down as to what category they would focus this material on. So you can see that here. And then some of the listings also will have assets, including photos and videos, related resources, PDFs, YouTube links or Vimeo links. So this is a really great example of, different practices within the material she's developing, products that she's used it in, and the kind of process shots to really see kind of what she's doing within her innovation work. Another great example is vegetable cashmere, which is actually be done in New York by David Lee. And so this is a really great another example of a listing that gives some overview, has the website and his contact information, and then goes into some of the specifics around the considerations and properties for sustainability and the classification and some of these more details. This one is actually available currently, so you can just go and reach out to David to get more information around the selling of and then purchasing of the product that you're looking for. And this one is a soy protein fiber specifically, so it's a plant alternative to an animal a cashmere. So this is the first piece within the Materials Hub. The next piece in the home page that you'll go to is the vendor directory. Again, you can just view the full vendor directory by clicking on this button, and it will take you to this page. Again, you can register as a vendor if you kind of fall into the categories that we're looking for, but again, you don't need to register to actually view the resource. This is all open access. And so there's a really great overview around this resource. And then again, we get into the directory here. And so you can filter it down by different business types that we've identified as kind of these ancillary pieces that a designer may be looking for as they're thinking about sourcing. And that could be sourcing of raw materials all the way to packaging and in between. So you can do certifications and standards, dead stock resources, recycling, material processing, which is more around the manufacturing of the product, different trade groups and nonprofits, marketplaces, packaging resources that I mentioned, shipping and logistics, technology development, and trade shows. And then again, we have the emerging designer support here. But again, I wouldn't get too caught up if it is not listed. I still would reach out to think about the ways that you can integrate your business or their products into your business, I should say. So we currently have 29 vendors on this list. And so a few examples that I wanted to give to you now. One is Cytex out of the US. They have a global factory network as well. But this is a great example of a listing that we had within material processing and a few different services as well. So you can see here they have a great overview, and then the business type that they have within their business, so dead stock resources, recycling, and material processing, their website, their contact information, and then some photos of their facility in Los Angeles. And then finally, within the main page of the Materials Hub, you'll have the Resource Center. And so this is kind of a catch-all within lots of other resources we wanted to include that speak to these different categories. And we'll be able to add as many categories as we'd like and different types of them to best suit the resources that you're looking for as a designer. And so right now we have webinars, which includes last week's webinar recording that you can watch with us, the invites to all the webinar series as well for this series, different articles from the past that we've done, tools that are interesting that are more specific to questions to ask for all materials or specific to the different fibers around alpaca and merino wool. And then the guides is really exciting because we've taken a lot of the pieces from our materials index, our sustainability hub, and broken them down into different sections of guides for traditional fiber guides, silk, rayon, lots of different things here. Some of the chapters from the sustainability guide that we did a few years ago as well around material specifically. So lots of really great resources here. And then as you'll see, you can reach out for any questions that you have on this page at supplychain@cfda.com, or if you have my email as well, or my colleague Emmeline from our team works on this resource also. And then you'll see some editorial stories at the bottom, which is very similar to all of our other CFDA.com pages that aggregate sustainability, supply chain related resources. Our really great partners that we have, with UGG leading that as of now. And then the CFDA newsletter at the bottom that you can sign up for to make sure you have the latest news and also updates around resources like the Materials Hub as well. So that is this resource. Again, it is currently live. We're probably testing a few different small things still, but you can go right now under resources and tools and start to explore these different resources. So that is the walkthrough. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we will move into the panel discussion. All right. So now that you've learned a little bit about the Materials Hub, I'd like to transition to our discussion with the designers from 4 companies who are navigating sourcing and material innovation really well. So hi, John, Kristy, Vanessa, and Yotam. Thank you for joining us. So to kick things off, the first question is for all the panelists, and I'll give you an order as to how to answer. But if you could each please give the audience a brief overview of the brand you work for, including the types of products you design or produce, and your role within the brand. So I will kick it off with John, if that works for you.
Sure. Thank you, Carl, for having me, and appreciate the opportunity. So I do work at Deckers Brands. The company designs, markets, and distribute footwear, apparel, and accessories. Footwear being the largest category for us. We do have a portfolio of brands, including UGG, Koolaburra, Hoka, Teva, and Sanuk. And for my role specifically, I have responsibilities over product development for what we call the fashion and lifestyle group of brands. That would include UGG and Koolaburra. And I do have responsibility over our materials developments and sourcing, and that will be across all of our brands.
Great, thank you for joining us. And next up, Kristy.
Yes, hi, I'm Christy Kaler. I'm the co-founder and CEO of 4 Days. We are really the first fashion brand built for true circularity. So we make 100% recyclable clothes, all sold through a zero waste system where we really incentivize the customer to recycle over throwing out. And then we've built a regenerative system to re-ingest those materials into new fabrics, new materials, and new clothing.
Amazing. Thank you, Kristy. And next up, we have Vanessa.
Hi, I'm the founder and CEO of Another Tomorrow. We are an end-to-end sustainable luxury brand, and really our raison d'etre is truly sustainability and bringing transparency to the system through digitized products that also help fuel authenticated owned resale. So taking a cue from Kristy, really a focus on circularity as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And then lastly, Yotam.
Thank you, Cal. My name is Yotam Solomon, and I'm the creative director behind Covalent Fashion, a new light brand. We're the first brand to launch vegan leather and eyewear made from air carbon, which is a carbon sequester technology based in Southern California. We were also able to introduce local manufacturing of our leather products that's within 40-mile radius by creating high yield carbon negative fashion. And we also were able to apply a substantial amount of transparency through creating a blockchain system that allows the consumer to see each and every step of how the products are made. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. All right, so now that you have a little bit of background on each of the different companies, this is also for all the panelists, and I'll actually start again with you, Yotam. So you're all addressing responsible design in your businesses in many different ways, with a large focus on responsible sourcing practices and their material innovation. If you could give just a little bit more details as to the top line areas of focus within sourcing or material innovation you are addressing in innovative ways, and why did you choose those areas to focus on, since there's so many different areas you can kind of tackle within this section of the supply chain. So Yotam, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Cal. It was founded by Kenton Kimmel and Mark Kermer, our Chief Technology Officer and our CEO. And essentially what they found was that there was a lot of beauty in carbon emissions, specifically methane and CO2. And I'm happy to say that the direction was very promising, because the reality is that when you utilize sequestered carbon, you're essentially starting with an extraordinarily high yield carbon negative material, which then can be applied to creating fully assembled products. So in our process, we really review all of the necessary steps to make the highest yield finished good products using air carbon, which allows us to do that by having a sequestered again methane or carbon product that is then developed through a fermentation process that is then applied to a finished product that can be essentially extruded into vegan sheet or injection molded to create anything from eyewear to any other materials. We're also currently in partnership with companies like Nike and Fashion for Good on projects to create additional components for footwear and fibers. So the applications are really limitless, and knowing that we can create carbon negative products that essentially deliver to the consumer by knowing that those more carbon sequestered out of the environment and locked away than contributed is a significant improvement in general. So that is a technology that we're focusing on.
That's great. Yeah, when we spoke a few months ago, I was super excited about that, and I think you building out these brand partnerships is really interesting as well, to start integrating their carbon into more products across fashion as well. So that's really exciting. Vanessa, I will go to you next, if you don't mind.
Yeah, with pleasure. So I think for us, we really start at the raw material level. So what I found in my research early on is, really sustainability is fundamentally both local and also systemic. And so for us, the view is that we really need visibility at that raw material origin and a deep understanding of its actual impact. And so for us, our real gold star, and we do this through the majority of our supply chain, is visibility and relationship at the farm level. We often forget that our clothing is either basically historically made of agricultural products or oil, or Yotam is clearly changing the changing the game there in terms of the other options. But really starting the raw material source and then providing the consumer complete transparency through every single processing step, and really looking at sustainability and ethics in a holistic way. So taking a very science-based approach to the environmental impact, taking a humane approach to ensuring that animals are not harmed or killed in the process, and then equally ensuring that living wages are paid across the value chain. And so it's really that step-by-step process and complete transparency. And like many here on the panel, technology is a deeply embedded part of our business. So for us, every single item that we create has a unique digital identity. And today that manifests through a QR code on the care content label, where the initial use case is one's ability to scan that, see the entirety of the supply chain. But the two next use cases are authenticated resale and also repurchase, which get down to both circularity as well as key consumer frictions in the process. And it's really been my belief that building a strong technological architecture from the outset is what really gives you a scaffold for continuous innovation.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about your websites, which I'm super excited, and I hope a lot of people visit after to see how you're communicating that all to consumer, because I think you do a very good job of that.
Thank you.
And so next up, we will talk to Kristy about this.
Sure. Yeah, I think for us, that concept of circularity is really about end of life. We've kind of chosen to tackle this issue with products that you wear and wear through. I think in contrast to luxury goods, which should have a very, very long lifespan, things like t-shirts and sweats and the things that you wear every day and are quite intimate actually don't, just inherently. And so for me, it was tackling that, which meant that we had to figure out the end of life at the beginning. So I think like everybody else, it's definitely taking material selection into consideration, full transparency, the ethical component of your supply chain, but what can we do with post-consumer recycling technology to ensure everything we put out into the world, we can deliver the promise of recyclability on. So we've chosen a stronger stance in natural materials as a result, because we can take advantage of mechanical recycling. There are very exciting things happening in the world of chemical recycling, just not quite at capacity yet. So, but we're kind of positioned to be there to really kind of embrace all of the innovation. I think the traceability component, similarly, we've created a blockchain-based tracking system, but it's more for the customer so that we know what's coming and going. And I think that, in all of this, it's that layer of traceability, connectivity, and data that also makes it very exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristy. And then John, for this question.
Yeah, I think Kristy prepped a little bit for me. It's a different situation with footwear as it is for apparel. End of life for footwear is a lot more complicated than apparel. It's hard to have full product circularity. So our approach has been really choosing more natural materials and materials that have a low or negative carbon emission to begin with. And, to help with that end of life, the materials that will break down and be reincorporated back to earth, back to nature as they go to the landfill. And in combination with that is durability, right? The long life of the product that we make and the quality of that product. So that those were really critical. In addition to that, we look a lot into waste elimination and reduction. So I'd say one of our biggest achievements in terms of carbon emission reduction was to repurpose the wool that was a waste of our sheepskin process. So that was probably one of our biggest innovation platform that we recently kind of created this UGG plush platform material where we are incorporating that repurposed wool blended with Tencel, which is another great fiber. I saw you have it in your website. And, kind of all of these new innovations, we culminated on an Icon Impact collection that we just recently launched. So we also incorporated there our sugar salt, which is made with EVA from sugarcane. So talking about carbon negative solutions, every pound of ethylene that comes from sugarcane would sequester 1.6 pounds of CO2. So, you know, this is just one more example, and I know we have another question down the road that I can explain some of this in a little bit more detail. But again, our focus has been on making product that lasts, you know, has longevity, but also creating products that, you know, the majority of a large percentage of those materials that have very low or even a negative impact, and they would break down as they are, you know, placed in a landfill at the end of the life of that product.
I think it's really interesting that, you know, we were talking last week with Nix, your colleague as well, but there's so many aspects that, you know, that UGG and Deckers is focusing on for such a large company. It's going to be hard, I'm sure, to be as nimble as a small company when there's so many things that you need to change. And so it's definitely commendable to see that, you know, there's lots of different areas you're focusing on. So thank you for that. And so thanks all for that answer. Moving on to some more individual answers for each of you. Vanessa, I'll start out with you. You know, you mentioned your website, and I've seen it, and it was definitely something I was super interested in, and it includes a ton of information about your supply chain, which is not something you see every day on a brand's website. Even thinking about, you know, some of the larger brands that have done it at the very beginning around, you know, Everlane or Reformation, they don't give, you know, even close to as much information as, you know, you are providing them. So what driving forces led you to share all of that information? And what impact do you believe it brings to your business and potentially others who may decide to be just as transparent or, you know, partially transparent around their supply chains as you do?
You know, it really came from a very personal sense of frustration. I come from a completely different industry. I was in finance for a very long time, and I really sort of tripped down the rabbit hole of all of the impacts of this industry, and initially really came at it from a customer's point of view and found it incredibly difficult, really just to understand the systemic impacts. And then also, once I saw a product that I was interested in, to really kind of tie that back to the information that I had. And so it really came from this place of trying to shine a light on this industry and bring a greater level of awareness, because I do think that individually and as a society, we generally sort of behave according to our level of awareness. And so it's really kind of trying to drive that. In addition, I think that, you know, to your point, there's some normative change here that needs to happen. And so I think one of the best ways to help contribute to that is to model what's possible. And so for us, it's that goal of truly modeling what is possible. And we, you know, this is as much for consumers as it is for other brands and just the generally curious out there. I think it's thrilling to see what CFDA is doing. So hopefully within the industry, it will be completely unnecessary. But there's still a lot of consumers out there who are really trying to understand what this really means, and also understand the trade-offs, because there are trade-offs, and we try and be really clear and articulate about what those trade-offs are so that they're more comprehensible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I talked about this in the last panel as well. It's just, you know, it's all about communication to your consumer and showing that, you know, you can give a lot of information, or you can say, hey, we're one step out of 10 steps in our process of, you know, becoming more responsible, and we're changing this next year, and we're changing that in 2025, and these are our goals. And I feel like, you know, all four of you actually have incredible websites that, you know, really focus on communicating that to consumers in your own way. And so I think that's really exciting to see that more brands are really jumping on this, and then, you know, customizing it to their own brand and voice and what they're comfortable sharing as well. So thank you. And so, Kristy, this is one for you. What considerations were made as you built out your business model to address zero waste for your product offering, and how difficult was it to accomplish? Because I can't even imagine, you know, the different hurdles you went through to actually make this happen. To again, you know, really address this zero waste issue and circularity.
Yes, it definitely, you know, is a model that didn't exist. And so there are quite a few components we had to consider. Obviously, the product and the product design and the supply chain, which we kind of talked on before. I think for us, very central to this was the consumer behavior. We have a business model that's built on selling us things in one direction. And we're all used to that. And then nobody wants, you know, like, oh, it's gone, I don't want to deal with it again. And so we had to figure out how to actually, you know, truly close the loop on that behavior by saying, how do we incentivize? How do we make it easy? How do we create the technology, the UI, the UX, the traceability to get all of that product back? And then once you promise to take it all back, you actually have to deliver on the processing, the tracing, the sorting, the grading, the recycling of it. And reverse logistics are another component of our business that just are underdeveloped, because again, we have this business model that's like one direction, out the door, and so I think for us that the technology undertaking was considerable and took us some time to figure out. I think for us, we always put the customer right at the center and say, we believe this behavioral shift is coming and that it will actually make customers' lives easier in the long run. And the customer, I think, is actually ahead of the industry in a lot of ways. Similar to what Vanessa was saying, she was searching for this information. It didn't exist. The customer's like, I don't want all this stuff. I want to participate in circularity, but it's just not accessible. And so that for us was just really key and core. And I think you see it also in our price points. We wanted circularity and sustainability to be accessible. We didn't want it to feel out of reach. We wanted it to feel like your friend that was kind of there every day. So, and that took a sense of engineering on the profitability side. I think ultimately for anything to transform a model, it has to also drive profitability and results from a business perspective. And I think in my history, sustainability had been seen as a cost center. And we really posed the question, how do you see it as a profit center? How do we drive ongoing profitability with it? So it was all of those considerations that kind of merged into an ecosystem, really. That's what we say is we have this ecosystem for circularity that starts with products, engages the customer, executes on reverse logistics, and then builds a regenerative process on the back end. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. It's a simple answer.
Yeah, I cannot imagine. But you've built a blueprint for other brands now, which is exciting to see.
Yep.
That's great. Well, thank you. And from Yotam, your side, so a lot of people have heard the term carbon neutral specifically, and it's been a topic of discussion for the industry, especially as of late. But carbon negative is actually something that was new to me within the last year. And to maybe many others that are joined here. So what exactly is carbon negative, and how do you design carbon negative products within it, within your business, and how is it accomplished through the work that you do?
Thanks, Cal. So what is carbon negativity? I get this question quite a bit. What it actually means is that the objective, whether it's a material, technology, product at hand, actually removes carbon out of the environment rather than contributing more carbon emissions. This actually became the norm a long time ago, back in the 30s, when plastics was originally invented and used, and then when it exploded in global commerce in the 50s. So essentially, all of the plastic damage we've done so far is actually only a reality of like about 70 years of pollution. But in our case, for Covalent specifically, having air carbon as the key technology enables us to actually utilize a natural molecule that is consumed by microorganisms and identified by nature, unlike other synthetics. It's also important to note that the material itself has a high carbon sequestration per the weight of it. So for example, by utilizing 1 gram of air carbon, we're actually offsetting a substantial amount of grams compared to using other materials. But in my process, which really is about design and product development, designing carbon negative products is really dependent on products being made with a high yield carbon sequestration material. It also depends on a highly optimized supply chain that ranges from renewable energy, reusability, optimization, and the consumption of natural resources, and low impact sourcing, so the entire distribution channel. So this includes manufacturing, it includes packaging, it includes 3PL, and even the retail environment, whether it's D2C or brick and mortar. As Kristy mentioned, actually, end of life cycle should be one of the first thoughts. It should never be left behind for a later stage. And when designing products, I find that materials can actually be highly inspirational and actually tell a substantial amount of the story, not just by the virtue of the material itself, but also the stories of the people behind those technologies. And in my past, I was able to create collections that was inspired by the relationship between drugs and DNA and explored unusual visual beauty in imagery from the Gulf of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And I did that to really help empower the audience and create an impact so that people really understand the gravity of that event. But today, I do think there's a shift happening in the marketplace, and I do find that we're only at the very beginning of the sustainability revolution, and it really impacts design. There are many more approaches to sustainability than before. I remember when I started back in 2007, there was almost no insight into different methodologies and aspects of sustainability, and I really do think that it goes well beyond exploring natural inspiration at this point. I personally find that I'm inspired by the craftsmen and women that make the clothes, and the fact that we're connecting traditional techniques with cutting edge technology. Fashion can be very visual, but it can also be emotional. And I think that by identifying these sustainability aspects that are dear to us, we're actually helping make change. So personally, I'm really excited about the future. And I think that we're bringing a lot more humanity to design by really thinking about sustainability and how that interprets the visual expression itself.
Great. Yeah, I definitely agree with it. This is only the beginning, and lots of exciting developments happen every day, which is, I think, why we focus on this material piece, because every day brings something new for this area of the supply chain, and there's so many resources out there, and hopefully we can narrow some of those down within this resource and highlight people like yourselves to show the different avenues a designer can take for that. So thank you. And so, John, you mentioned a few of these examples already, but I definitely would love some more insights to it. You obviously have a very large global supply chain for the products you have, and you've created some interesting products using plants and other great alternatives. Can you break down just a few of those that maybe you mentioned before in more detail? I know I've seen specifically UGG Plush, UGG Cycle, the Plant Power Collection. You mentioned the Sugar Soul as well. And any interesting insights or qualities that make them, strong as a responsible alternative to other materials, whether you used before or, something you're using now.
Yeah, no, perfect. I'll start by talking a little bit about UGG Plush. I would say UGG Plush has probably been the most significant innovation we introduced in terms of sustainability in the last few years. We basically incorporated, as I mentioned before, the waste from our sheepskin processing, the wool that has been repurposed from that process. And when we started to blend that with Tencel fibers, right, another very sustainable fiber alternative, we basically became self-sufficient in our source of wool. So we don't need to buy much, if any, wool from, shorn wool from the open market. So 98% of all the wool that UGG uses is now repurposed from our own sheepskin process. So that was only possible by creating this UGG Plush material with the incorporation of, blended Tencel fibers in it. So what that also did, we now have a material that incorporates the best of both worlds. Wool is great, normally associated with, cold climate. So Tencel helps to make that material more versatile, to be really good for both, winter and cold weather, but also for more warmer climate applications. And not only that, but that became our platform for fiber sustainability innovation. We can blend any types of fibers that we would like to explore to achieve different, features, functions, attributes, and also to attain our sustainability goals in terms of carbon reduction. And just to give a little bit perspective, what it means that 98% of wool being repurposed, so how much of an impact that has in our emissions overall. So annually, we reduce 131 million pounds of CO2 if you compare that wool with virgin wool, right? It does help to reduce 44.3 billion liters of water per year as well, and 82.9 million megajoules of energy. So these are not small numbers. You say we have a very large global supply chain. So when you do introduce a material that has such a large application, because it is across the majority of our product now, it does make a big impact. But some of these innovations, they're introduced in capsule collections, right? So that's how you start testing them. So that's where we keep pushing boundaries. So in spring 21, we launched the Plant Power Collection, as you mentioned. So this was really a collection that we tried, all of our key new innovations, Ugg Plush being one of them. We introduced what I believe to be the first 100% plant-based fur in the market. With Ugg Plush made with 100% Tencel. And we use our sugar salt, which I mentioned is EVA from sugarcane ethylene, was made of hemp, lactohevia, and some RPT. Again, our preference is for natural materials, but for some functionalities, you still need some, petroleum-based. So RPT was our solution there for some of the applications. But, to put in perspective, the women's fluff sugar sandal that was part of that collection, we reduced about 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions and 50% of the water use if you compare with your conventional materials. And for the men's part of the collection with the New Male Natural and the fluff sugar, we reduce emissions by 30% and water usage by 30%. So, you can see how much progress you can make by just introducing some of these innovations. And as I say, those capsule collections are springboards. You test these materials on a small collection, and then eventually they'll make their way to the main line, as with Ugg Plush. Ugg Plush now is used across the board. And all of these new innovations are going to eventually make their way into our main lines as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I feel like that's something that we hope to inspire through Materials Hub, which is, testing and building these relationships to either do a capsule collection, like you said, and to build the connections between the designer and the innovator to start integrating these even in small ways into collections, and then hopefully at a greater marketplace, relevance and distribution as well. So I think that's a great point to bring up, is around that testing and the importance of that, and then going to scale after that. So thank you all for those answers. That's really great. One other question I have for all of you, so if anyone can jump into this, I don't have a specific order on this one, but there are many ways a designer can integrate responsible practices related to their supply chain, including their sourcing practices, as we're talking about today. Where would you suggest designers listening today should start to integrate these practices as you have, whether it's about sourcing or innovation within materials or other areas of the supply chain? So if anyone has a willingness to jump in first, please feel free.
Well, I have my mic open, so I'll start. Carl, I did make a couple of points. One of them being supply chain visibility. That's probably not the most exciting for designers, right? So normally not where designers are thinking they should start. But I think that's really where you have to look at. You need to be able to quantify and qualify what goes into your product, right? And one very basic, concept of, environmental impact is you have to understand environmental impact unit of measure is a metric, is a mass metric. So, the way you buy your materials, commercially is a different unit of measure. You buy by the piece, you buy by the yard, the square feet. But it's very different when you measure the impact. This is the environmental impact of those. You need a unit of mass, so how much it weighs, right? And that's not a very easy information to find. You need to find all of this so you can start to really measure impact, to really understand where your priorities are. You need to build that visibility. You need to know what you use. Now, of course, every brand will be different depending on maturity stages that they are. More mature brands would have a more established foundation. Some new brands, they can start from scratch and they can define what their product are going to be made of, right? So a brand like UGG that has been on the market for decades, we do have a foundation we need to work with and not deviate too much from our brand DNA. So staying true with the brand DNA, but also, making sure we are working on priorities. So I would say that's probably where you want to start, really quantify and qualify what goes into your product. And the other piece of that is, I think LCAs are really key. Once you know what you use, how much of it you use, you need to be able to have a way to measure that impact and measure progress, right? So LCAs, I think, is a way to standardize that measurement and avoid greenwashing. Because that I see that as a problem. A lot of companies not knowing exactly the impact of what they use or the relevancy of it may be making false claims of sustainability. So LCAs would really avoid you falling into that trap, and making sure that whatever claims you're making are validated.
Great, thank you.
I'll jump in and add on to that because I agree completely about the LCA, but I also think as you're getting started, and that it can feel overwhelming because there is a lot to learn and a lot of information. And so I would suggest also kind of staying focused, picking a path, going deeper in one category, knowing you can make an impact with, if you already have a collection, with a section of your collection at a time, if you need to, and just get started. But I think that level of focus and kind of depth of education will set you up to kind of have a foundation from which to expand. Because at least when I talk to people entering this space, can be like, what do I do? There's so much. What do I do? And there is so much, and there's so much to learn, and there's so much to kind of weed through the fake information or the real information, or is this a scalable solution? Will I hit a ceiling? Is there innovation on the horizon? So that would be my suggestion. It's just stay focused and kind of tackle it one bit at a time.
Yeah. I would also like to be the third that vouchers for LCAs. Third-party specifically, third-party lifecycle analyses are a huge reality check, because again, when companies do it independently, it can be damaging because the data is not always as accurate. But to also touch on Kristy's point, education. I find that there's wealth of information, especially when it comes to original manufacturing and sharing techniques and know-how and connections, and even just the fact that the CFDA is actually expanding its index to offer new resources and vendors. This is the kind of foundational fashion to me, is really sharing and working together and enabling growth for one another. So I think there's again a huge paradigm shift. But if I had to prioritize, I would definitely say regional manufacturing and identifying what you have in your own backyard that you can use versus going overseas or starting to create this really robust distribution chains. There's a lot more resources than we actually realize, and looking for them is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I'm happy to echo what's been said. In particular, I think early on, and given the likely audience, the need to focus. So one, I think that as we talk about LCAs, I think they're critically important. I also appreciate the resources that sometimes have to go into them. So some of us are better suited than others to be able to pay for those at the outset. I think overall it speaks to a much bigger opportunity for robust data in the industry. But for sure, trying to do everything at once is a recipe for a lot of challenges and frustration, especially if you're working with an existing set of products. So trying to understand, at least even at a high level, what's most material to what you're doing, and really, really going deep, as Kristy suggested, into that realm is hugely important, and will also help to get around issues that are just commercial bottlenecks like minimums and things of that nature, where you can also establish, I think, much stronger and lasting partnerships. Changing something you're going to use once in one season is not going to move the needle, either from a sustainability standpoint in the moment or even long term, because really the big changes happen through collaboration.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, for all of you mentioning LCA or life cycle assessments, it's definitely something for me to do some homework and maybe do a resource that we can add to the Materials Hub around the Resource Center around navigating those, how to access them, how to build your own, things like that. So, what third parties are good to speak with on that. So definitely from the audience side, have hopefully more to come on that point as well, since you all really stressed that. I do have one other question, but if anyone has a question to ask from the audience, please feel free to drop it in now, because we just have a few more minutes to go. In the meantime, and if we get a question, I'll jump in as well from the audience. But another question I had for all the panelists is to just help ideate around different vendors that could be good for other designers to start exploring. And so, fiber and packaging innovation have both been very big areas to create impact within supply chain, and is, very much built around our entire initiative here. Are there any organizations or vendors you'd suggest to other designers to build relationships with or learn from related to fiber and packaging innovation? We'll have a few great, vendors over the next sessions that we'll have within session 3 and 4 next Thursday and the following Thursday after that. But any organizations or vendors that you would maybe suggest as a starting point within some of these different areas. And if not, feel free to send it over to me after, and then we can also send along to the audience members as well.
I'm happy to raise a hand for Fibershed. They were just incredible and helped us actually identify a number of the farms that we began working with at the outset. And because, again, so much of that impact does happen at the ground level, and we just learned so much from actually developing those relationships. I'm a huge fan of theirs, particularly if you're working within raw materials and with a desire to work within regional systems, as Yotam suggested.
And for me, very quickly, fiber related, I would recommend Textile Exchange. It helped us a lot earlier on. We participated on their fiber benchmark program, so it really helped to shape the direction we took. And for packaging, the one organization people may want to check is Canopy. So I think that they do have great resources to help on your packaging sourcing journey. They help with policy, creating very robust policies on your packaging sourcing. So those would be good resources to check.
Great, thank you.
Fashion for Good. I very much appreciate everything they're doing and have done to promote sustainability in many years now. And I do have a shout out for the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, Lacey. I used to actually have one of my companies was there when they founded. So they're creating a lot of innovation across a lot of different industries. And I think it's very exciting that they're doing it here locally in California, in the US as well.
Great, and I can add, actually, early in our journey, well, two kind of resources come to mind. We do a lot with Ellen MacArthur Foundation because they're very focused on circularity. So I always point people, they do really great lessons and talks and write papers, and we participate where we can on that. I think really take the full cycle into consideration, which I think it's just a great education tool. We've also, just as a vendor, been working with Recover from the beginning, and I give them a shout out because they have a really cool story. If you want to learn about mechanical recycling and why they started, it was actually out of a need because they had a shortage of cotton raw material supply. And so I love learning. I think it's just a great example of those stories to understand why people are in this space. They've been in it for 70 or 80 years, so much longer than you would imagine. And I think just asking those questions and learning those stories are really fun, and they create great partnerships. So
yeah, absolutely. So we have a question on here from Nelson that says, can sustainability be affordable from the consumer and designer point of view? It seems like there's a stigma of sustainability equals expensive, which I think a lot of people think about within the business space of sustainability within their brands. Any thoughts on that one?
Yes, there's definitely a reality there. And one thing that we should point out is there's a lot of different methodologies or aspects of sustainability. And it's especially for startups or younger brands, it's always best to start with one versus aiming at the entire picture. Because something that's catered to Caylor may not necessarily be ethical, and something that's ethical may not necessarily be upcyclable. So really identifying what a brand is passionate about and focusing and honing on that. I think one of the bigger challenges as an industry, again, is narrowing that supply chain to become original. And in Western countries, it's just more expensive. And the same thing goes for ethics, because if we want to make this and provide decent wages, that clearly is a substantial cost of fully assembled products. So those two things are really where the costs kick in, I think, the most. Not talking about LCAs, but I think that that's really where the stigma starts. And there's a reality behind cost associated with sustainability and ethics. That's very true.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just maybe very quickly. Of course, cost is a challenge when you're trying to incorporate more sustainable materials. One way we found to help offset some of that, whenever you try to eliminate or reduce waste, that usually translates to cost reduction. You improve yields. So sometimes, as much as you can do, managing your waste and improving yields, you build budget to afford the incorporation of some more expensive sustainable materials, and in the end, it offsets each other. So that would be a good path, But of course, many sustainable solutions does come with a premium, and it is an art and a science to manage that and still drive a profitable business. But we found that managing waste, improving yields is a good place to build that budget to afford those, more expensive materials.
I would also say that the waste reduction adds materially. For us, the world is not your oyster when you're designing sustainability, and I think that that's just a reality. So for us, we found if you really focus on having a subset of, or for us, a core set of materials that you have crafted and you design into them, it really eliminates a tremendous amount of waste in the design process. It creates some constraints, but that can also lead to greater creativity, which is really exciting. And I think there's also just need to be adjustments in the business model. For sure, the overall cost, as we care more about ethics, more about waste, is going to go up. I think that's a good thing. And so we just need to be creative around business models to create accessibility into those products at the same time that support businesses and also allow pathways for consumers. And that's, I think, an area where there's going to continue to be a ton of innovation as well.
Great, thank you. And I think we probably have time for one more question, and this is probably specific to Yotam, yours, but and then we'll close out because I know we started a few minutes late, so we'll do this as the last question. But from Alexander, what are the best product carbon accounting tools or online platforms for fashion and apparel products? And again, if anyone has these, please feel free to jump in.
There are quite a bit. So for us, we're actually using a third party called SCS. And there's a substantial amount of consulting companies that actually specialize in this. I will say that what I've noticed is that there's a few creative companies that are actually creating their own public-facing, free of charge calculators that enable a startup to actually look at the certain aspects that need to be evaluated for carbon footprint, and even just understanding what those are is extraordinarily helpful for younger brands. I'm blanking on which ones. I know MasterCard has, but there's also one out of Europe that actually created one. I think it may be South Pole, but there are some free resources that are available on Google if you're looking for something that's complementary. And obviously there's the consultants that can actually do that as well, like SCS.
Yeah, and if there's any additional, please feel free to send over from anyone else, and then we can also forward along to Alexander and then the other attendees as well. So we are at time. So if we weren't able to answer a question, if you have additional questions, please feel free to email us at supplychain@cfda.com. We are happy to forward along the questions along to the panelists to answer, or if there's anything from the CFDA side that we can answer as well, we definitely will send along some responses. So I'd like to thank you all for joining in today. And again, thank you for our incredible panelists for taking the time and sharing your insights with all of us today. And congratulations on everything that you've done so far. Lots more room to go on, it sounds like. This is only the beginning of our journey within responsible design, of course, but you've been able to do some really incredible things so far, so thank you. And as a reminder, this discussion will go live on CFDA.com within the next 24 hours or so. And we still have 2 upcoming panels regarding fiber material innovation leaders and also packaging innovation leaders being held on October 21st and October 28th, respectively. And so Zoom registration links can be found for those in the same email you received for this one. Also, you can find it on the Materials Hub under the Resource Center that I showed you earlier, or you can just send over an email to supplychain@cfda.com to request those links. And so thank you again for everyone for joining, for the panelists, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.